What if Iran's last economic lifeline suddenly disappeared? What if the most important battle of the modern war wasn't fought with missiles, or fighter jets, or even aircraft carriers, but with logistics? Because history has shown something remarkable. Powerful militaries rarely collapse the moment they lose a battle. They begin to weaken when they lose the ability to sustain one. And sometimes, the most decisive weapon is simply closing the final door. For months, international attention remained fixed on missile exchanges, air defense systems, and diplomatic negotiations. But beneath those headlines, another contest was quietly unfolding. A struggle over shipping lanes, commercial ports, energy routes, and the economic infrastructure that allows a nation to keep functioning during conflict. Military analysts often describe logistics as the invisible battlefield. It receives far less attention than combat operations. Yet throughout history, supply networks have frequently determined how long wars can continue. That is why every major maritime power places enormous strategic value on ports, not simply because ships dock there, but because ports connect industries, financial systems, supply chains, and military logistics into one continuous network. When most people think about Iran's maritime position, they immediately think about the Strait of Hormuz. And for good reason. It remains one of the world's most important energy choke points. But there is another port that has quietly played a very different role. A port located outside the strait itself. Far less famous, far less discussed, yet strategically significant for reasons that extend far beyond oil exports. For years, this port represented an alternative gateway between Iran and international trade. Its geographic location gave it unique advantages. Cargo moving through the Arabian Sea could avoid many of the navigational risks associated with the narrow waters farther north. That alone made it valuable. But geography was only part of the story. Over time, several regional powers developed their own interests in maintaining commercial activity through this corridor. Some viewed it as a connection to Central Asia. Others saw it as part of larger transportation initiatives stretching across Eurasia. For shipping companies, it represented diversification. For governments, it represented strategic flexibility. And for military planners, it represented something even more important. Redundancy. Modern logistics is built around redundancy. No nation wants to depend on a single transportation route. If one corridor becomes disrupted, another can continue carrying essential trade. That principle applies equally to civilian economies and military supply systems, which is why strategic planners rarely focus on one port alone. Instead, they evaluate the entire transportation network. Every highway, every railway, every pipeline, every harbor, every shipping lane. The question is never whether one location is important. The question is whether enough alternatives remain available if that location becomes unavailable. Throughout previous periods of regional tension, this alternative maritime gateway continued operating under varying political arrangements. Some trade continued. Certain commercial projects moved forward. International investment remained limited, but not entirely absent. This created an important strategic distinction. Even as pressure increased elsewhere, one channel of economic connectivity still appeared to exist. That mattered, because in economic strategy, perception can influence behavior almost as much as reality. If businesses believe commerce remains possible, they continue planning. Banks continue financing. Shipping companies continue calculating routes. Investors continue evaluating risk. The moment they conclude that access has fundamentally changed, those calculations begin changing as well, sometimes almost overnight. That is why maritime restrictions carry consequences far beyond the ships themselves. Every vessel represents insurance policies, bank loans, fuel contracts, cargo schedules, manufacturing timelines, and thousands of individual commercial decisions spread across multiple countries. Interrupt one shipping route, and the effects ripple across an entire economic system. Military strategists understand this well. Modern conflict is increasingly about influencing an opponent's ability to sustain long-term operations rather than simply destroying equipment on the battlefield. Factories require imported components. Industrial production requires raw materials. Repair facilities require specialized equipment. Commercial revenue supports government budgets. Government budgets support defense spending. Everything is connected. Remove enough connections, and pressure accumulates without a single additional shot being fired. This is why economists often describe logistics as the bloodstream of national power. A nation may possess factories, ports, ships, and infrastructure, but unless those systems remain connected to international commerce, their effectiveness gradually declines, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. History repeatedly demonstrates that prolonged economic isolation can reshape strategic calculations just as effectively as battlefield setbacks. Whether that ultimately changes political decisions depends on many factors: leadership, domestic resilience, international partnerships, available financial reserves, alternative supply routes. Every conflict develops its own unique balance between these variables, yet the underlying principle remains remarkably consistent. The fewer options a country possesses, the greater the pressure placed on every remaining option. And eventually, strategic attention shifts, no longer asking how to expand, but simply asking how to endure. That is the stage where logistics becomes strategy, and strategy becomes survival, because in modern warfare, the final door is rarely just another port. It often represents the last remaining connection between an isolated economy and the outside world. In Part 2, we'll examine why control over maritime logistics has become one of the defining features of 20-first century competition, how economic pressure can alter military planning, and why modern conflicts are increasingly decided by supply networks long before they are decided by firepower. If logistics determines how long a nation can sustain pressure, then finance determines how much pressure it can absorb. That is why military analysts rarely examine ports in isolation. They study what flows through them, not only containers, but capital, revenue, industrial inputs, energy supplies, replacement equipment. Every shipment represents economic activity that ultimately supports national resilience. When those flows slow down, the effects extend far beyond the waterfront. Manufacturers wait longer for components. Shipping insurance becomes more expensive. Investors demand higher risk premiums. Import costs increase. Export earnings decline. None of these changes decides a conflict overnight, but together, they reshape the strategic environment. Modern wars are rarely won through one decisive battle. Instead, they are often influenced by the cumulative effect of hundreds of smaller decisions. Every delayed shipment, every interrupted supply chain, every rising transportation cost. Each one places additional pressure on governments attempting to balance military threats with economic stability. That is why economic strategy has become inseparable from military planning. For decades, defense planners largely focused on platforms, aircraft, warships, missile systems. Today, they increasingly focus on networks. How quickly can damaged equipment be repaired? How rapidly can ammunition be replenished? How resilient are supply chains if one transportation route becomes unavailable? How many alternative corridors remain? These questions often matter just as much as battlefield performance. History provides numerous examples. Countries that retained access to reliable logistics frequently outlasted opponents with impressive military capabilities but fragile supply systems. Industrial endurance has repeatedly proven just as important as tactical success. That lesson has become even more relevant in the 20-first century. Globalization connected national economies more closely than ever before. The same commercial networks that accelerate economic growth during peacetime can also become strategic vulnerabilities during periods of crisis. A disruption in one region may influence manufacturing thousands of miles away. Energy markets react within hours. Shipping rates fluctuate almost immediately. Financial markets begin pricing uncertainty long before political leaders issue official statements. This interconnected environment changes how governments calculate risk. Instead of asking only whether military operations are possible, they also ask whether they are economically sustainable. Can industries continue operating? Can transportation networks absorb prolonged disruption? Can international partners provide alternative sources of supply? Every answer influences strategic decision-making. This is why modern maritime strategy extends well beyond naval power. Warships may protect shipping lanes, but commercial confidence determines whether those shipping lanes remain active. Insurance companies, shipping firms, energy traders, manufacturers, and financial institutions all become part of the broader strategic picture. Military planners understand that commercial behavior often changes before governments formally change policy. Businesses respond to uncertainty quickly. They reroute cargo, delay investment, reduce exposure, seek safer alternatives. Those commercial adjustments can reshape regional economics long before formal diplomatic agreements emerge. From this perspective, ports become more than transportation hubs. They become indicators. Their activity reflects confidence. Their cargo volumes reveal economic momentum. Their shipping schedules provide insight into broader regional stability. Analysts watching satellite imagery often pay as much attention to commercial traffic as they do to military deployments, because commerce reveals whether an economy is adapting or struggling. This is where strategic pressure becomes increasingly complex. Economic influence alone rarely forces political decisions. Military pressure alone rarely achieves lasting stability. Diplomatic negotiations alone rarely resolve deeply rooted security concerns. Instead, modern strategy often combines all three. Military capability establishes credibility. Economic measures increase incentives. Diplomacy provides a pathway toward de-escalation. Each element reinforces the others. None operates effectively in complete isolation. For policymakers, the challenge is maintaining that balance. Too little pressure, and negotiations lose urgency. Too much pressure, and opportunities for compromise may disappear. Finding that equilibrium has shaped nearly every major international crisis of the past several decades. It is also why maritime logistics continues attracting so much attention from defense analysts. Control of sea lanes influences trade. Trade influences economic resilience. Economic resilience influences strategic choices. Everything connects. Ultimately, the broader question extends beyond any single country or any single conflict. The real lesson concerns the changing character of modern competition. Nations increasingly compete through infrastructure, transportation corridors, industrial capacity, technology, energy security, supply chain resilience. These systems may appear civilian on the surface, yet they have become central components of national security. Future conflicts may still involve aircraft, missiles, and naval forces, but they are equally likely to be shaped by shipping capacity, industrial production, financial stability, and the ability to keep complex logistics networks functioning under sustained pressure. That is why strategists increasingly argue that logistics is no longer simply supporting military operations. In many cases, logistics has become the battlefield itself. Because once options begin disappearing, every remaining route becomes more valuable. Every remaining supplier becomes more important. Every remaining decision carries greater strategic weight. The final lesson may be the simplest one. Modern power is not measured only by how effectively a nation can project force. It is measured by how effectively it can sustain itself while under pressure. Military strength can deter. Economic resilience can endure. Logistics connects the two, and in an increasingly interconnected world, that connection may prove to be the decisive factor shaping the next generation of global competition. If you found this analysis valuable, let us know what you think. Do you believe future conflicts will be decided primarily by military technology, or by logistics, industrial capacity, and economic resilience? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy in-depth strategic analysis that goes beyond the headlines, be sure to subscribe for more discussions on modern warfare, global security, and the forces shaping tomorrow's geopolitical landscape.